Hi, this is Pooja Bhausar and today we will discuss about Java's most popular framework like Spring, Hibernate and the Springboot. Now, the popularity of a Spring framework is just because it is having a two main important features like dependency injection and the inversion of control. In a dependency injection, it is nothing but it is the process in which we can inject or insert the bean of a one class into the bean of another class. Here bean means object, means we can insert the object of one class into the object of another class. That is what we called as dependency injection, which we can perform by using two ways, either by using constructor or by using setter and getter. Now the second and the most important feature of a Spring is nothing but inversion of control, in which the control of a program execution is being inverted from a programmer to the Spring IOC container. Means in a Spring application, the object creation or the bean creation process is not controlled by the programmer, it is controlled by the Spring IOC container. Now the Spring IOC container means it is a tool like a garbage collector that we have in a Java. So Spring IOC container is just like a garbage collector which manage the life cycle of a bean or object. Means Spring IOC container can create an object in your application, it can hold that object in your application, and after use of that object, that Spring IOC container can delete that object from your application, right? So the Spring IOC container is responsible for creating and destroying bean in your application. So now this process of object creation and destruction is being inverted from a programmer to the Spring IOC container, and that we called as a inversion of control process. So Spring framework is having a multiple modules. Like Spring is divided into the modules like Spring Core, Spring JDBC, Spring AOP, Spring MVC and the Spring ORM. So in a Spring Core, as we have discussed, it consists of a dependency injection feature. Now the second module is Spring AOP, where AOP stands for aspect oriented programming, in which we can execute external services or the external code before or after our main code. Now the next module of a Spring is nothing but a Spring JDBC, in which we can perform database connectivity just like we have performed in a Java JDBC. Now the next module of a Spring is nothing but a Spring MVC. Using Spring MVC, we can be able to develop a web-based application or web applications by using the concept of model, view and controller. So here model is nothing but a data that we can process in our application. A view is nothing but a JSP pages, or view is nothing but the presentational part of your application, and controller is nothing but it is a main servlet which can control request and response object that we have to process in our application, right? So after that, the next module of a Spring is nothing but a Spring ORM, which is a combination of Spring and Hibernate framework. Now let's talk about the Java's another most popular framework, that is nothing but a Hibernate. So basically Hibernate is nothing but a ORM tool. Now ORM stands for Object Relational Mapping. So here object is nothing but any real world entity, whereas relation is nothing but a table, and map means to store or to save that objects. So what is the task performed by this Hibernate? It is used to stored or a save Java's object into the relation. Relation means what? A table or a database. Means basically object relational mapping is nothing but to save or to persist Java's object into the table or into the database. Now the popularity of a Hibernate framework is just because it is having a basically Hibernate framework is used to perform a JDBC connectivity that we can do by using normal Java JDBC also, but there are lots of advantages that Hibernate have over the normal Java JDBC, and that advantages are if we are using normal Java JDBC in our application, so in that case we'll have to create a table. But if you are using Hibernate in our application, then we don't have to create any type of a table. We just have to use @entity annotation above our class name, so that Hibernate will automatically create a table with that same class name into the database. Now the second advantage of Hibernate is, if we are using normal Java JDBC, then in that case we have to write query for each and every CRUD operations. But if you are using Hibernate framework in our application, so in that case there is no need to write any type of query to the programmer. Hibernate can automatically write that query for the programmer internally. Now let's talk about the third advantages. Now if you are using normal Java JDBC, so in that case we need to handle lots of exceptions like class not found exceptions and SQL exceptions in our application manually. But if you are using Hibernate framework in our application, so in that case Hibernate will internally handle all of these kinds of exceptions. Now the fourth and the final advantage of the Hibernate framework is, if we are using normal Java JDBC, then we'll have to repeat the connection code again and again, like we have to specify driver name in our application, username, database name, user password, dialect, that we need to mention in each or every application if you are using normal Java JDBC. But if you are using Hibernate, so you don't have to repeat that connection code again and again. You just have to write that connection code once in a Hibernate configuration file called as hibernate.cfg.xml file. So we have to write that connection code only once in our application. So we don't need to repeat it again and again. Now let's talk about the third and the most popular framework of a Java is nothing but a Springboot. Actually, Springboot is not the separate framework. Springboot is the sub module or the sub framework of a Spring framework, but still Springboot is having a multiple advantages or improvements over the Spring framework. Basically, Springboot also consists of all of the concepts of Spring, but still Springboot is having some advantages. Now let's discuss that one also. So basically, if you are using Spring framework, so you have to create XML file in each and every application. But if you are using Spring Boot framework in your application, so we don't have to create a configuration file to specify the configuration of a bean. Right, this is the first advantage. Second advantage is, if you are using Spring framework, then we have to, means programmer have to add all of the dependencies manually in the application. But if you are using Spring framework, then there is no need to add dependencies manually. We can select that dependencies whatever we want to use in our application. So we can select that dependencies at the time of creation of that project. And the third advantage of a Spring Boot is, if you are using Spring framework, so in that case to develop web application we need to add servers manually. But if you are using Spring Boot framework, then there is no need to add any kind of a server, just because Spring Boot internally or Spring Boot is having embedded servers like a Tomcat and Jetty servers. So I hope you will understand, guys, you will understand the concept of or a difference between all of these frameworks. So that's it from my side. Thanks for watching.